Spanish, and he now joins us from his hometown, Bombay, or which has been re-christened as Mumbai. Ranjit, it's a real treat and pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Sudeep. Thank you very much indeed for your warm and wonderful welcome. Yes, indeed, we go back many decades, back to our first books. And it's, oh my goodness, blast from the past. But I want to thank you, Sudeep and Indran and Dawn for this invitation. And Pauline, Tom, Marcos, it's a real pleasure to read with you. I'm looking forward to hearing your work, of course. And welcome to everybody who's joined us from around the planet this evening. So I'm going to read from one of the books you shared, Sudeep, Hunchprose, the most recent one. And I'll begin with a poem called Man with Parrots. It goes like this. A man with two caged parrots waits for a megaphone to screech. He is flying out of a monsoon. He will land where it never rains. The man does not belong to himself. He did not script himself. He is the residue of his fingerprints. He is who his iris says he is. He's been recorded as a wavering image, opening and closing his mouth in ritual sequences that suggest speech. He has been waved through. No one speaks to him. He drags his minefield around with him, clearing a track through safe zones. He does not know that the sun will burn through his skin as he builds a pyramid in which they will show images of people like him building pyramids as the sun burns through their skin. Not jinn, not ghoul. He is scan, he is quota, he is number. He won't feel the rain on his skin for 3 years. He will have nowhere to go. Thank you. So from that evocation of alienated transnational labor, I thought I'd move back several thousand years, if not a million years, to the Stone Age, back to a moment where we have one of the earliest records of someone making something that exceeded everyday ritual and life, and someone who produced an object that we could think of as art. So this is called Ivory Bird, and is set in the Swabian cave, Hohlefels. Ivory Bird. Nothing in the world except the rasp of adze, the scrape of gauge against the gutted mammoth's tusk. I'm going to read that again. Nothing in the world except the rasp of adze, the scrape of gauge against the gutted mammoth's tusk, until you cup, cream ridged into feathers, wings folded back, legs pulled in, long neck, head, beak, a missile pointed at water far below, or the clouds, the first cormorant ever sculpted in the sky of your palm. This next poem is called Pilgrim. Did I ever think heaven would ripen its doors before their right season, expecting me to arrive? Any day now, my boots caked with mud, my coat weighed down with rain, my lips moving to sounds not tethered yet to chance, more hostage than pilgrim, telling my story in bursts, how I let rivers surge through the trenches, how a thrown knife pinned me to a farewell, how I shrugged myself loose and ran, a banner rippling in and out of air, my hands burning with colors I'd scrounged off rocks, shrubs, spiky trees, on my way here, leaving my palms on outcrop and leaf, my soles on creased water. These poems are inhabited by migrants, refugees, people of uncertain address, people who have to, as so many of us have to, uh, sail under borrowed colors or work through camouflage. So here comes Town, a poem called Town in the same spirit. In this town, ask for directions in whispers. Tell no one your birth name. Say you're on your way to nightfall. Buy more bread than you'll eat. Read the signboards forwards and back. Mimic the rare songbird hiding in a bush. Stride along the pipeline bridging the creek. Shuffle off the linen strap on the Kevlar. Play infidel on the hill, believer on the beach, because one blue is so much closer to us than the other. On your knees, in the sand, and when it's time, pray you'll come back as pearl thread surf, not driftwood, in this town. I'll follow this with one called Prayer. Don't ask for the wall of the skin to break, the light blue line of morning to be drawn across your eyelids, the first watchful parrot of the day to ambush you with prayers. Peel back every proverb you were taught to reveal the raw welt of ardor until you find where the reluctant chronicler wrote, burn and dance, because what is healed is dead.
Excellent. Beautiful.
Thank you, Sudeep. How am I doing for time?
Very good.
Yep, keeping well. Yes.
Great.
Keep
Super.
going.
Okay. Speaking of those who go away and those who come back, here is a very particular kind of experience, and it's summarized in a poem called Table. Always make place at the table for the guest who walks in with a peony, who's exchanged his drawl for a twang, who once sliced the moon in half with a whistle, who struck a vein of gold in his sleep, who goes red in the face laughing at his own jokes. And for the guest who left the house 40 years ago with a wooden bowl and a vow of silence, one brings you a charter of demands, the other a chaplet of sky flowers. This one's called Train, and I've been haunted for the longest time by the ways in which trains have played a certain role in crossing borders, that slammed down suddenly and really marked the difference between survival into a new future and complete extinction. So, Train. What was I thinking? The train whistle woke the whole town up. Good souls zipped fast into their spacesuits, discovered no moon, and lush flames swirling under barrels of tar lined up outside rows of houses steeped centuries deep in peace, a soul sleep elsewhere familiar only to livestock curtained from the falling axe and the sealed train that's about to bump west-east across cratered plains, carrying its death weight.
Magnificent. Well done.
Market. Never forget the salt makers. They can trap the sea. Never forget the makers of flint knives. They can split the earth. Never forget the spice sellers, they can tempt the tongue to sing. Never forget the kite makers, they can scissor the wind into streamers. Never forget the carpenters, they can build horses that breach walled cities. Never forget those who stretch hide into leather, they can craft drums that bring down palaces. Speaking of power and how completely power can be impervious to human vulnerability, as we see unfolding in our subcontinent and many other places. Fire, and it goes like this. I never once saw any blood gush out from that marble lion's mouth, not when a boy fell at the barricades, blinded by buckshot, those faces pocked with metal seeds, those faces blurring in nailed eyes, not when a girl falling on a balcony cried that flames had swallowed her heart. A fire engine drove right past, bells clanging. And a companion piece to that called Hawk. Caught up on the wave of the past, a hawk skirls back, ripping the seamed and sutured scar of our passage. Its wings are lined with scripts no one can read, but everyone brawls over in this city of howling dogs and whinnying saints. The blood that spurts under its claws is common, the sort you could smell anywhere, the sort you can smell everywhere. Suffer us all, dear God of many names, to come together and feed ourselves to that insatiable beak. And I'll close with a poem called Sovereign. A number of these poems, as you've seen, have to do with urgencies that were building up and coming to a head. I mean, they were written before the pandemic really kicked in, but I think we were dealing with questions of oppression, of ecological catastrophe. And this poem, Sovereign, comes out of some of those deep feelings of how we're all united across the planet today by a sense of impending doom more than anything else. So here comes Sovereign. Plucking sunsets from the water, the horned sovereign half stamps, half slides across the beach, stopping to dig, claw, rake. What washes up is drilled shale, lost static parsed from gulf to strait, plastic whirls in whose wake gagged dolphins trail, scarred humpback whales whose shadows will drift unmoored up thawing glaciers. What washes up is news of the cracked ice, across which a shivering fox is making her way from Svalbard to Nunavut, leaving her paw prints on frozen currents to a shore stippled with burst nebulae, a shore that on a compass dizzy with wind-scattered directions, she can and can't call home. Thank you so much for your attention.
Brilliant, marvelous, Ranjit. Thank you so much.
Marvelous.
Wonderful, Ranjit. Wonderful poetry.
If I may just start with a quick question. Well, a quick question, slow question. There are phrases in each poem that are sort of stand by themselves. I mean, they are poems in themselves. They're sculpted in stone, you know. So what do you do when you write something, a phrase? Why do you go on with the poem, or how do you know when to stop? Because several of these poems, I think in each one there I can identify 2 or 3 lines that I could just stay with and teach, or just on them, just as lines. So can you sort of reflect about that in the
Sure.
poet. Sure.
Indran, thank you for the question, because it actually points to one of my working methods, which is that I do actually work over a period of time with fragments and notes that just build up in notebooks. So often they just sit there waiting for some kind of energy to course through them and bring them together, or to come together around some kind of, like a magnet or a nucleus. So that's one of the ways in which I work. But also in this book particularly, I think my project or experiment, if you will, has been to work with a language that is continuously in some danger of breaking down, and then it pulls back again. So that notion of fragments being shored up, so to speak, I think that really is part of the mise en page and the kind of breadth units that I'm trying to work with here.
Very good.
No, I'm glad you brought this up, Ranjit. I mean, we've been following each other's poetry for God knows how long. And initially, if I were to track things down, your poetry has sort of assumed a form of wise ease. You know,
Oh my
it's
goodness.
supple, it's easy on the ear now. I remember the early books were so overly erudite and dense that people had trouble understanding what you were writing. Not that they don't anymore. I mean, in a sense, you sort of sum it up by a phrase like a shore stippled with burst nebulae. You know, it's got the entire effect of light, dappled light, and stripping of atoms and bringing atoms together. At the end of the day, of course, you know, we are all held together, you know, with the proton, neutron, and electron. You know, it's the same patterning. Talk about your development with language, because you're such a language-oriented poet. Indran, of course, pointed out that there are phrases which leap out and could be poems on them by themselves. I know we both keep diaries together, and I remember you put it on Twitter. You put that Sarnath notes up
Yes.
there, and I have a poem on Sarnath, and I was saying it's interesting how some things went into the poem and the other things weren't there. So talk about your work as a curator, as a diarist, as a person who amalgamates images and words, both centripetally and centrifugally, because I think those two opposing forces are very important in your poetry.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for those responses, Indran and Sudeep. To me, increasingly, the counterpoints to my work as a poet, very generative counterpoints, have been my curatorial practice, where I'm constantly bearing witness to images that sometimes defy interpretation. Like when you're faced with the work of an abstract painter, you love that work. How do you bear witness to it? There's something there that resists language. Or a tantric Devi from the 6th century who is present to us, but without a context. So you evolve different ways of bearing witness. And I think that's been really important to me. The other counterpoint to my writing is translation. I find it immensely fruitful, I think, to work in a space between languages, to carry across things I learn in another language, or whilst crafting, bringing that poetry across into English. And in some sense, this book too, I think, benefits from that to a certain extent. And maybe the entire development in some strange way has come about through a certain apprenticeship to translation. You know, from this sense that you wanted to speak or I wanted to speak in this, what a commentator described as a fiendishly obscure voice, to this sense that honestly, we as poets now need to recover the role we once had in society as shamanic figures, as people who spoke for and with others. And increasingly, our destiny is the destiny of being one among multitudes. So how do we open up our own language? How do we make it both familiar and strange whilst we're doing that? I mean, I think for me, it's really a question of no longer being caught up with the sovereign I, but to see how that I is already interconnected with so many different fates and destinies and predicaments. And how does language then reflect that? That's one of my key questions.
It must be a wonderful feeling to sense, to see the evolution in your own work. I mean, to feel it in each poem, in each line. I mean, this is a major book you've produced here, and I'm coming to your work without having, known that early period. So great. I think that's what we need. We need poets who are speaking in the language of our time, reaching economists and ecologists and bus drivers, all, I mean, there is a certain literateness that one needs to have to be able to read, but I think you're writing in a language that's very accessible and intelligible. And you're writing from different traditions, and two different traditions as well. I mean, we can come back to this later, but I'd like us to think about, to whom we're writing for and in which traditions, because of course you have all of the Indian traditions, but then you also have poets like Ted Hughes influencing, coming into your Hawk or something. I mean, just thinking out loud, but I mean, I hear and see ecological concerns that
Right.
bring your poetry to poets from different traditions, different parts of the world. And anyway, so it's and I'm also interested to learn about Don Moraes, who I had the pleasure of sharing a column space with at one time in the Hindu many years ago, and
Right.
I've always enjoyed his poetry, and really must get hold of your book, your complete poems or collected poems, because he a great poet and a pioneer also in English poetry, in Indian poetry in English. So I'm curious to know about your relationship to him and how you came to be his sort of editor and curator. And I realize we're short on time, but your work as a curator is fascinating and very serendipitous with our next poet, because Pauline is both a painter and a poet, and has a strong career sort of developing in both areas. Sudeep, shall we go on then to Pauline now and then come back?
Well, just one
Or do you
more
have another
comment, and then we
question?
should move on to Pauline,
Yeah.
because we can always come back, because that's
Right.
why it's a good thing to keep these programs open-ended. One of the things I do want to point out with Ranjit's new book, Hajj Prose, is the fact that the book itself is about 140 pages, printed, bound. The page extent is that much, but actually about 45% of the book is blank. So there are pretty much every poem is preceded by a blank page, or there's a blank obverse page, which is of course tactical in many ways. We'll talk about that much later. But the element of typography, white space, all that sort of feeds in, and I think that'll feed in with Pauline as well, because many of us are working across various kinds of forms, both photographic, cinematic, curatorial, and artistic. So we'll get back to that. But I thought it's important to point it out, because some people said, what happened to the printers? When you see the book first time, all these blank pages out there.
We must remember that back in the 18th century, Lawrence Sterne, left a page blank in his Tristram Shandy. So,
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ranjit. Wonderful kickoff and brilliant introduction today. I'm really always cheered by these readings. They feed me for days and weeks to come. Let's move on to Pauline Leroy. Pauline Leroy is a dear friend, a poet, a painter from Chile, that amazing country that produced Pablo Neruda and Gabriela Mistral among its Nobel Prize winners. But, there are so many great poets from Chile. And it's a country that's fascinated me personally as a diplomat. I try to move to Chile, sort of doing the reverse from Neruda, where he went to Ceylon, my birthplace. In any case, I came across Pauline Leroy's work by accident, and then we became friends. And she has a secret life as Marina Germain, which is a a name under which he has published a couple of books as well. As I mentioned, a poet, a painter, a sculptor, and a creator of video art and audio poetry. She belongs to the Style Writers of Chile and also the Association of Painters and Sculptors of Chile. She's also a proselytizer in that sense for her art and for art, writing and painting, not only her own work, but the work of her compatriots. She has published 9 poetry collections and a book about her visual art. And these have been published in the US, in Chile, in Spain, and in France. The published books include Magma, published in Chile in 2009, Himinam in 2011, Bulom in 2013, and many others. And the book that we'll be reading from today, which I've had the pleasure and honor of translating and working on the translation, it's a work in progress, Obscena Sabiduría, which came out last year in Spain. And we'll be reading some of poems from this book and along with my versions in English. And we'll be reading first in the original Spanish and then followed by the translation. Pauline, would you like to go ahead? Thank you.
Thank you, Indran. Hello, friends. This reading is a great moment for me today with the important poets Ranjit, Hoskote, Marcos Airton, and Thomas Edward Phillips. I want to say thank you to Don Krieger, Mr. Sadden Sin, and the poet and diplomat and my translator, traductor is Mr. Indran. Thank you. This is a very important invitation to me to read today, and I will read my poems in Spanish, my native language, and Indran will translate it for you. And these poems came from my book. My book, it calls Obscena Sabiduría. It means obscene wisdom. And I will read a poem in Spanish for you. Thank you to all. El poema lleva por título Himen Natural. Vengo llegando de una vida larga, muchos metros de momentos no quietos, esparcidos, torbellinos, que salieron en busca de la infancia. Esa lancha, ese ojo, ese sonido, manto blanco, virgen de huida y abnegada por un himen natural, a presión nuclear y embrutecida más, por siempre suave, con manos poderosas, con dientes de sables, barcazas cruzando un estrecho de isla y continente que fueron lentamente dando metros y metrallas a los ojos de una niña que no comprendía nada.
Natural hymen. I have come from a long life, many meters of unquiet moments stretched out, whirlwinds that went in search of infancy, that boat, that eye, that sound white cloak, virgin of flight, denied by a natural hymen with a nuclear pressure, brutalized but always smooth, with powerful hands, saber-toothed barges crossing a spit of island and continent that was slowly shaped in meters and shrapnel in the eyes of a girl who understood nothing.
El poema lleva por título De mi terciopelo bajan duendes con agallas magníficas. De mi terciopelo bajan duendes con agallas magníficas. Cientos de ancianos nos comprimen, atrofian el astuto devenir. Los chillidos no se oyen, sin embargo, dentro de ti los puedo ver. En la orilla de mi mundo oceánico, Los destellos se apresuran sobre mí. Tu sonrisa acaba siempre lejos. Los faroles de neón ríen de la encrucijada. Refulgiendo mi corazón, duele con el hielo, que lo quema lentamente y no muero, porque el alma está al fondo del abismo, donde un día cubicaron mis latidos. Te recuerdo abriendo en busca de mí, y luego al olvidarte no hay cajas ni chalecos, y desnudos nos paseamos al igual que el día cero, cuando fuimos menos, y de regalo obtuve el crujiente sonido de mi tanque corazón.
From my velvet genies step down with magnificent desires. From my velvet genies step down with magnificent desires. Hundreds of the old compressors stunt the astute becoming. We do not hear the screams, however, within you I can see them. On the shore of my oceanic world, flashes rush over me. Your smile finishes far away, always the lighthouses of neon smile about the crossroads. Shining, my heart is in pain with ice that burns it slowly, and I do not die, because the soul has reached the bottom of the abyss, where one day my heartbeats were measured. I remember opening in search of me, and then on forgetting you, there are no boxes or vests, and nude we stroll just like the day zero when we were less, and as a gift I received the crushing sound of my tank heart.
El poema
Marvelous.
lleva por
Marvelous.
título...
Marvelous. Marvelous.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. El poema lleva por título Fiesta de fantasmas. De mis moléculas tibias vienes a nacer, desde mis lunas apareces, luna repartida, hermana. Desde mi nombre desenvaino la espada, la abro con cuidado de hada, solo para observarla. ¿Será que en algún momento deba activarla? Tu nombre desvanecido surge a la vera del camino, una ruta sin vereda ni definición verdadera, libre del despilfarro de aquello codiciado por tantos, algo vacío que se piensa por lleno. Vengo llegando de una fiesta de fantasmas y ninguno se parecía a ti. Estos eran de venganza, de tristeza, de lo no comprendido. Pero tú eres diferente. Solo hay una cosa entre ellos y tú, solo una cosa en común y en donde se conjuntan por instantes. Y no es realmente una cosa, es una molécula de afán y afable intención. Lo seriamente común entre los fantasmas y tú soy yo.
Ghost party. From my lukewarm molecules you are born. From my moons you appear, moon shared sister. From my name I unsheathe the sword. I open it with the care of a fairy, only to look at it. At some point, should I activate it? Your faded name will surge on the edge of the road, a route without pavement, nor true definition. Free of pilfering of what is so desired by so many, an emptiness that thinks itself full. I come from a party of ghosts, and no one looked like you. These came from vengeance, sadness of the not understood. But you are different. There is only one thing between them and you, me.
El poema lleva por título Hágase tu luz lejana. La noche oscura del alma se aclara durante su trayecto espiritual y la metafísica es fácil entrando en asuntos misteriosos de buena cepa y de energía luminar de un sol constelar que no es este ni ninguno, sino un ave o un aire santo de extrema divinidad. Hágase tu luz lejana, la palabra en las bocas tristes de paisajes aún tranquilos. Despierta el alma de su noche y lo hace llena de luz de otros bordes, aludiendo al instante del sumario pausado y anexado en racimos de expandidos levantes.
This one's called Make Your Faraway Light. The soul's dark night clarifies during its spiritual journey, and metaphysics is easy, entering into mysterious subjects of good vintage and luminous energy, of a sun and its constellation that is not this or anything, but a bird or a saintly air of extreme divinity. Make your faraway light the word in sad mouths of still, tranquil landscapes. Wake up the soul of the night and fill it with light from other borders, alluding to the instant of the summary paused and annexed in vines of expanded eastern winds.
El poema lleva por título Haz como si nunca me hubieses conocido, siquiera ensayado, como las hojas que nunca miramos y ya se han ido. Haz que cuando me viste yo no estaba, solo fui la acción de una mujer desesperada. Y cuando tus pensamientos de horizontes fijos se crucifiquen a sí mismos, una noche desesperanzada, entonces será que unidos, tan unidos, estamos desde ese olvido que de algún recuerdo volveremos resurgidos.
The title of this one is Act as If. Act as if you would have never met me, not even tried, as the leaves that we never see that have gone. Act as if when you saw me, I was not there. I was only the action of a desperate woman. And when your thoughts of fixed horizons crucify themselves on a desperate night, then we will be united. So united we have become since that forgetting which might give some memory from which we will return resurgent.
El poema lleva por título Lápida. Aun cuando no termine de morir, sigo reclinando mi espalda sobre el taburete que en su erguida forma muestra mis fechas y nombres como acto de fe. La lápida dice que existió un día en que morí de a poco, cuando las ballenas daban hermosos saltos en un rincón del océano en donde nunca hubo alguien que las pudiese ver.
Tombstone. Even when I have not finished dying, I continue to recline my back on the stool that in its erect form shows my dates and names like an act of faith. The tombstone says that one day existed when I died a little, when whales slept beautifully in a corner of the ocean where no one could ever see them.
El poema lleva por título Me ahogo a nado. Nervios de acero para alguien tan pequeño, tan de piel, tan de dedos. Cables de metal y plástico para este ser de venas y de sangre. Palabras para mi expresión y luego el silencio que recorre mi ojo y mi verso causando el descontrol de dendritas en calidad de auxiliantes. Duelen mucho los nervios porque no son de acero y brillan como si lo fuesen y luego el desmayo entero que no apaga nada de las venas vivas con las que me recupero, sola y sin pecado, sola y tan sola que me ahogo a nado.
The penultimate poem, I drown swimming. Nerves of steel for someone so small, so leathery, so many fingers, metal and plastic cables for this being of veins and blood, words for my expression, and then silence that runs over my eye and verse, causing the abandon of dendrites and the quality of auxiliaries. The nerves hurt a lot, because they're not made of steel, and they shine as if they were, and then the complete fainting that wipes nothing out of the living veins with which I recover, alone and without sin, alone and so alone that I drown swimming.
El poema lleva por título Todo se marchita, ven pronto a jugar. Jardines en donde das vueltas observando la estética de las flores y su simple despliegue. El tiempo es corto, todo se marchita, ven pronto a jugar. Libera tus instintos de los tallos que no explican el porqué de lo lento y de pronto una inmensidad. Debes reunir las gacelas que vuelan por sobre tu hogar. Los colores que no quieres habitar debes continuar. Alma de fuego, ven pronto a jugar. Distraído sonríes, no olvides corretear nuestros sueños abatidos que en rondas divertidas dijeron eternidad. No permitas que trastiendas nos destruyan. Tiempo ido, no te vayas, ven pronto a jugar.
And the last the selection today, everything wilts, come soon to play. Gardens where you turn about, observing the aesthetics of flowers and their simple unfolding. Time is short, everything wilts, come soon to play. Free your instincts from the stems that do not explain the why of the slow, and suddenly an immensity. You ought to gather the gazelles that fly over your home. Colors you do not wish to inhabit, you must continue. Soul of fire, come soon to play. Distracted you smile, don't forget to chase our dreams cut down, that in happy rounds they called eternity. Don't permit the back rooms destroy us. Time that is gone, don't go. Come soon to play.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Pauline.
you to all. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful, marvelous. You know, it just takes your breath away. It's Ranjit's poems followed by yours. I mean, you know, we've set the bar so high. I must say, you know, the translations in English are equally brilliant. The poems, to me, simultaneously explode and implode. They're both about myth and memory, of course, which you excavate with great felicity, and obscene wisdom. What a brilliant title for a book.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you go on with magnificent desire, you know. So tell us a little bit about the way you use the trope of erotic or erotica, but it's so subliminal and so beautifully sort of couched in your larger questions of myth and memory and larger issues of language and art.
Okay. Indran, if you can help me with the translation of the say, Shudin.
Sure, I can try, of course.
Okay.
I better be able to, otherwise I better retire from the job. Go ahead, Pauline, adelante. Puedes hablar en español si quieres o responder o como.
Bueno, tú tendrías que traducirme después, pero
Okay.
el título del libro, Obscena Sabiduría, Obscene Wisdom, surgió, no sé cómo en realidad, del mismo libro, del material que había en el libro.
Okay, one second. She's saying that the title, Obscene Wisdom, she's not sure how it came about, except it came about from the very book in which it appeared. It sort of came naturally from the material that she was writing. Adelante.
Sí, y bueno, en cuanto a la sensualidad o el erotismo que pueda tener el libro y esos poemas, y se relaciona también con lo orgánico del cuerpo, con lo orgánico también del cuerpo, las venas, la sangre, pero también con lo orgánico del alma y también de la sensación o el deseo del amor.
Okay. So she's talking about the sensuality and the eroticism in the book, sort of coming out organically out of the body, out of the blood, out of the movements of biological movements of the body, and but they also come sort of organically out of the soul and out of. So it's organic on many levels. I mean, she's saying not just the physical, but a kind of metaphysical level as well. Go ahead.
Sí, y como pintora, al trabajar con pintura y, por ejemplo, mucha materia, digamos, cantidad de pintura, cantidad de pasta, eso es orgánico, es como si estuvieras tú, no sé, curando una herida, cocinando un plato también, ¿cierto?
Okay. As a painter too, she's working organically with a lot of material, a lot of paint, you know, as you can see in her painting behind her. She's as if she's cooking a meal, or I don't remember the other example she gave, but it's
Si curaras una herida también, estuvieras como
curing an injury, you know, putting a bandage on an injury, healing. Yeah, go ahead.
Entonces, la poesía también para mí es orgánica.
Poetry is also organic for her, yeah.
Como la pintura para mí también es orgánica. Y,
Like the painting, yeah.
Y para mí todo es expresarse a través de ideas creativas también. Sí.
Everything is expression through creative ideas, both as a poet and as a painter.
Yeah.
Adelante. Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to ask you one more question, both of you. I mean, Indran, maybe you can answer this. When I was, the two poems, certainly the two poems I had prior to the reading, I was comparing the syllabics of both the poems. And the original and the English are very, very closely aligned. Were you consciously going back and forth and making sure that the English should be the same, sort of the line lengths and the breath pauses need to be similar?
Yeah.
Or were you working organically or in tandem?
Well, I think there's a certain chemistry between us. Hay una química entre nosotros, hay que reconocer. One has to admit, you know, through the windows of our world. But and that comes through, I think, in the translation. So it's done with a lot of love and with a lot of attention. But I'm also a conservative translator, which puts me into some trouble, I guess, because I want to try and respect the original metrics and the form. I mean, if there are 5 lines in a stanza, I'd like to reproduce the English in 5 lines and more or less keep to the form of the original in the English. And I do believe that if I can get the meaning across, then I have done a good part of my job, you know. But I do want the poem to dance in English. I mean, if it's otherwise, there would be no point. I mean, I guess I could modify the English a little bit. I did just a little last night on one of the poems where I noticed that here and there one could, in Spanish the word would be depurar, you know, purify it even more, you know, bring it down to even more of an essence. And I think so. These are working translations. I think here and there might be more distillation to be done. But yes, to answer your question, yes, I try to correspond, and I think I did it sort of organically, but then consulted with Pauline, you know, because she does read and does in English and can give me her opinion and does and did. And of course you speak in English. I think you're being very, I mean, naturally being a bit formal in reading in each poem, but when you read the poem, there was this wonderful, you know, I mean, it was a beautiful reading, Pauline. I love the way you present the poems, and grateful to have this chance to share these work with this wider audience. Translation for me is, as you know, I imagine a kind of writing the poem again, you know, in the new language as well, and learning in a very intimate way motivates the poem, so you feel that you're in in the mind and heart of the poet who you're working with, and so it's a good to have that experience. It's a refreshing experience. Talking about blood, it's literally a kind of a blood transfusion that you're having in English, because when blood is very much in this book, and the movement of the blood through the veins, and
okay, I think Indran's, oh, okay, you disappeared for a bit, but yes, yes, you put it very beautifully.
okay.
Yes, I think, yeah, it's just the poems sang beautifully, as did Ranjit's. And I want to re-emphasize, because these words are coming up. So I think the energies are all aligning themselves naturally across the globe and across the latitudes and longitudes, which is to do with organic way of working, being open, and love and friendship. I think it's just so essential and crucial, because the forum today is only being held together through love and friendship. And at this point, because we've reached the halfway point, Indran will talk about how we started this series way back in 1990. I was a student at Columbia University School of Journalism. He had just graduated the year before. So that was the connect. And we started this monthly in-person reading in my flat, where we did these readings in a Indian Bathak style. So people would take their shoes off and come in, and we used to pass a hat around, and the people would donate money. And once we not always, once we minused the money for the cheap wine and cheese, we would divide the rest of it to the readers who came and read. And we had a fabulously sterling kind of stars. All of them have gone on to, like, Phillips prizes and this and that, and so when we restarted the series online in December last year, formally, of course, January, we had a sort of a reading party where many of us came together. Indran, would you like to say something before we move on?
No, that's all good. Yeah, it began as a living room salon, and we hope that spirit remains as we do in this virtual series. And thanks so much to Don Krieger for his helping us put this together and make this available monthly. The only thing I wish you would correct is this business of paying ourselves first before we gave money to the poets. The why I like to rewrite history and think of the we did it at the end, but no, it was a good. We did collect money, and we did pay off the wine, so that's good.
Yeah,
Thanks so
in fact,
much.
at the lead-in, you will see we found the original poster we had made. And this was, the days of, well, I didn't have a computer then. I had a second-hand typewriter, but that typewriter had this sort of incredible facility where you could slide in these different fonts, so I could have italics, for instance, which was such a thrill. There we go. That's the original invite right there. And you can see the kinds of people who were reading, Phyllis and Shashi Tharoor, Meena Alexander. Yeah, I mean, there's just fantastic. Everybody supported us so well. Yes, and
Thank you very much.
we try and
Thank
keep
you.
that intimacy still alive. And the important thing, as we were saying when we started, was the only thing that matters here is the quality of poetry and then the friendship that ensues, both before and after. So we have to hold our hands and walk together. So thank you.
Thank you.
And now we move to Marcos.
Marcos, yeah,
Who is the first
wonderful.
to arrive, and Indran will be introducing Marcos.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very thrilled. Thank you. Muito obrigado, Marcos, por sua presencia nesta manhã. I'm Marcos. I met in Brasilia, which is sort of like the center of the world in a way, and it's a new city, the new capital of Brazil, and yet he's in South America and writing in Portuguese, but also conversant in so many languages. I mean, in Spanish and in English, and I'm pretty sure he's good in French as well. And he's an ecologist. he's many all the right things for our times, you know, both as a poet and his passions, his obsessions. And he is also connected to American beats, you know. I mean, he made the pilgrimage to City Lights and to meet and to look for Ferlinghetti. He's a world poet. I mean, in a sense that he's connecting to different traditions, including the American poetic tradition, the U.S. poetic tradition, as well as traditions of Brazil. I'd be fascinated to learn more as we speak after the poems about the influences and the roots of his poetry, which is widely available, and he makes it very easily available. You can find his books on, you know, in places like Amazon and so on. So, but let me just give you a few details of his life. He was born in Teresina, the capital of Piauí, in the state of Brazil. He's a civil engineer, a university professor, and works in the federal government of Brazil. Lives in Brasilia, has been there since 2001. Poet, he also writes short stories and translates, and he's an editor. He's also a composer and lyricist, working with musical groups Bandana and Patua, and the Lake Street Band. So he plays percussion, drums. He's a part of the collective of poets and the cultural collective Verve Verde, and author of many books, including A Vida Sente a Si Mesma, Life Feels Itself, A Terceira Margem Sem Rio, The Third Riverless Bank, Storb and Schotter, poems written in German, English, French, Spanish, and Italian. So you see, I was being modest in the number of languages to which he's acquainted and composes in. And some of his poems have been translated into English, French, Spanish, German, Dutch, Russian. He's a member of all the Brazilian Writers Associations and the Academy of Letters of Brazil. And he's a good friend and a proselytizer for poetry on the Brazilian stages and now in the virtual rooms. So welcome, Marcos. We're looking forward to hearing you read. He's going to be reading. Are you going to be reading in the original Portuguese as well as the translations, right? Well, go ahead. It's your...
Yes, I can. I don't know. I can read in Portuguese. You want to read in English?
It's up to you. You'd be happy. I'd be happy to, if you want to read the English, or if you would like me to read, you let me know. But
okay, sometime I can read. I read some poems from my first 5 books.
Okay.
In the beginning from 2000.
So you're going to read the English and the Portuguese, right? Or do you want, correct? Or you're going to just read?
I can read sometime in English.
Okay.
Perhaps I will try to read in English.
Go ahead. Thanks.
Eternal Return. Poetry blossoms without an appointment, without time commitment. Poetry sometimes delays, even if it's planted with a shovel, with a rod. Poetry doesn't always sprout, even if it's watered with time, water, or wine. Poetry, however, always returns, and it fills me with joy. Okay. And the next one is, no, I shouldn't say. No, I couldn't say that what I feel now is nostalgia. No, I don't dare say that what I want is your softness. No, I'm not afraid to say that what I love is your simplicity. No, it's not for me to say that what I desire is your freedom. Dia a dia, day by day.
Good. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, do read
ahead.
the Portuguese as well, if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah, I can read in Portuguese. I will try to read in Português. Dia a dia. A noite de verão antecipou a imensidão do dia. Um dia comum, de trabalho, de pequenos progressos, de deveres cumpridos, de deveres sabidos. O dia efêmero e azul encampou a noite longa de solidão. I will try to read in English. Day by day, the summer night anticipated the immensity of the day, an ordinary day of work, of small progress, of fulfilled duties, of known flavors. The ephemeral and blue day took up the long night of loneliness. And I read a poem, the Barrocão Street. This is the street that I was born in this street in my city, Teresina, Piauí. Barrocão Street. In my childhood backyard, so many red and white guavas have been sprouted. On the terrace of my adolescence, among soccer balls and glass marbles, such solid friendship have been grew. Nowadays, I already a mature man, I still sow dreams and I wait for fruits. Indran, do you want to read in English the next one?
Sure.
Nenhuma carta em seu nome. I will read in Portuguese.
Yes,
Okay.
no letter in my name. That's the title.
I will read in Portuguese and then
Yes,
you
please.
read in English.
Let's
Okay,
do the
thank
rest of the
you.
reading that way. You read in Portuguese and I'll read the English. Go ahead.
Nenhuma carta em meu nome. De soslaio a memória de teu rosto, cravado na rocha da ausência. Fotografia. O vento quente sopra a cor do esquecimento, sombria melancolia do dia a dia. Tentei entender teu nome e nossos minutos como se houvera fruta na fruteira de minha existência. O domingo desabitado fareja o ronco do motor de meu carro empoeirado. Nada, nada além de silêncio e pó. Há mais de um ano, nenhuma carta em meu nome.
And the translation in English is no letter in my name. Sideways, the memory of your face, spliced on the rock of absence. Photography. The warm wind blows the color of oblivion, somber melancholy of the day by day. I tried to understand your name and our minutes as if they had been fruit in the fruit bowl of my existence. The uninhabited Sunday sniffs out the snoring of the engine of my dusty car. Nothing but silence and dust. More than a year ago, no letter in my name.
Thank you.
Okay. Adelante con...
Can you read in português, né? Na tarde que se avizinha. Sejamos eterna, querido, mesmo na plenitude de nossa ira. Chega de nossos discursos prontos. Não suportamos mais esperar o fim do verão. Estranhamos em silêncio o conselho dos mais velhos. Tentamos inutilmente reler os jornais passados. O que buscamos nas páginas surradas? A paisagem se adensa na geografia das ruas de nossa cidade desconhecida. Mergulhemos no assombro de nosso desejo. É sempre possível a palavra mais pura e límpida, querida, mesmo fora de nosso dicionário. O cheiro do feijão em panela de ferro reacende o fogo de lenha da imaginação, o relógio da manhã. Herdeiro de nossa própria memória, divisamos a rua de nossa fraqueza e ausência na tarde que se avizinha. O leito seco do rio aguarda a estação chuvosa nas cabeceiras. Depositemos, pois, iguarias e provisões na vazante de nossas horas. sejamos eterna, querida, mesmo na finitude de nosso dia.
In the coming afternoon, let's be eternal, my dear, even in the fullness of our wrath. Enough of our ready speeches. We can't stand waiting for the end of summer. We suspect silently the elders' advice. We have tried ruthlessly to reread the old magazines. What do we look for in the shabby pages? The landscape becomes thicker in the street's geography of our unknown city. Let us immerse ourselves in the astonishment of our desire. The most pure and clear word is always possible, my dear, even out of our dictionary. The smell of the beans in an iron pan rekindles the wood fire of the imagination. The morning clock, heirs of our own memory. We see the street of our weakness and absence in the coming afternoon. The dry bed of the river awaits the rainy season at the headwaters. So let us lay up delicacies and provisions in the ebb of our hours. Let's be eternal, my dear, even in the finitude of our day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, more one. Minha senhora, não trago na sacola esmola, trago apenas poesia, minha senhora. Não trago no corpo estovo, trago apenas magia, minha senhora. Não trago na voz algo feroz, trago apenas cantoria, minha senhora. Não trago na mão flores, trago apenas amores, minha senhora. Não trago no olho maldade, trago apenas saudade, minha senhora. Não trago na vida glórias, trago apenas memórias, minha senhora.
I have to just say that it's a beautiful song you've just sung us, Marcos. The version in English, these are your own translations, right? My Lady. Now the word alms, A-L-M-S, I never know how to pronounce it. I do not bring alms in the bag. I only bring poetry, my lady. I do not bring hindrance in my body. I only bring magic, my lady. I do not bring something fierce in my voice. I bring only singing, my lady. I do not bring flowers in my hand. I only bring love, my lady. I do not bring wickedness in my eyes. I only bring truth, my lady. I do not bring glory in life. I only bring back memories, my lady.
Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I don't know if I have more time.
You can read, yes, please go ahead.
You can read the next one in English direct. It's so a big long.
Without, you don't want to read the Portuguese? Okay, as you.
Lavoura de Galáxias.
Yeah, it's up to you, please.
You can read in English, please.
Okay. The title in English is Galaxy's Tillage. My mum has been gone without really telling me goodbye. The poet became hoarse. The poet became deaf. Being strong was necessary. Not crying was necessary. I cried. Everyday life became a void among months of the year. Sky, boredom, fish, clouds, and the grey river. Streets and squares without names on the plates. Dreams, key opened stars, galaxies. I don't choke anymore, Mum, only with the hiccup of your departure to the worlds of the winds. The terrace of my childhood must always be the opening of your smile, sweet, simple. Sundays will be aurora, locomotives sprouting in rose bushes, cared for in the garden at home. One day, unintentionally, I will invent words and sounds. When I was born, I cried. The hours, there will be a clock to measure them. Patinas of a large closet filled with fine Chinese porcelain, mere memories of voices and silences. diaphragmatic air roots, microvilli of dreams, breath of fright beyond. In the infinite stillness of the empty room, where shall we organize your slippers under the bed from now on? What could be sewn on the old singer machine? Our old children's clothes. You pick up, I know, Mum, in the new harp, subtle sounds of galaxies, eternal snaps of love.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Bravo. I think we have time for just to finish. You have 2 short poems to go. Go ahead, Marcos.
E mais não tem. Do fruto, carne e caroço, e mais não tem. Da pele, beijo e tato, e mais não tem. Da terra, alma e gema, e mais não tem. Do ventre, Deus e sopro, e mais não tem.
And nothing else. From the fruit, flesh and stone, and nothing else. From the skin, kiss and touch, and nothing else. From the land, soul and yolk, and nothing else. From the womb, God and breath, and nothing else. And now, el último.
Último.
No, sorry, there are 2 more to go. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah?
Yeah.
As palavras. A Cecília Meirelles. As palavras voam em cada passo de estrada, em cada chão, em cada nada. As palavras como que formigas enfileiradas. As palavras como águias esfomeadas, flanando, quase sem peso no ar. As palavras rangendo o cântico do cosmo, abismo infinito, em todo vácuo, em todo nada.
Words dedicated to Cecilia Mireles. Words fly at each road step. Words fly at each road, step on each floor, on each nothing. Words like ants lined up, words like hungry eagles flanking, almost weightless up in the air, words squeaking the song of the cosmos, infinite abyss in every vacuum, in all nothing.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And
Indran.
did you want to read the last poem or shall we stop there? I think you might want to read it. Go ahead.
I can read the song.
Yeah.
Estado democrático de poesia. Que não se organize a poesia em parágrafos, mas em versos e não versos. Que nas intermináveis listas de considerandos, considerem-se todas as formas de poesia. Que nunca mais se torturem as palavras, que se abominem as quadrilhas, somente as quadras serão permitidas. Que não se dilapide o patrimônio poético nacional, que se preserve o direito da palavra de ir e vir, e voar, caso queira.
This one is called The Democratic State of Poetry. That poetry shall not be organized in paragraphs, but in verses and no verses. That in the endless lists of recitals shall consider all poetry forms, that words will never be tortured again, that the gangs be abominated, only a gang of verses will be allowed, that the national poetic heritage does not squander, that the words right to come and go and fly shall be preserved if it wants. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Eu que agradeço. Thank you, Indran. Thank you, Sudeep.
That was wonderful, Marcos, wonderful. And the translations are also really, really, really precise. I mean, are these these are your translations?
Yes, I have a help from Beatriz Santos, an English student, and I have first all the translated all.
Yeah, the stanza 11 from Galaxy's Tillage. In the infinite stillness of the empty room, where shall we organize your slippers under the bed from now on? My goodness, my goodness. Where do you get those lines from, eh? But your poetry brings so many different sorts of things all in one place. Of course, we can understand that by the sort of provenance at the same time, the sorts of things you're involved in. You're not just a poet, so to speak, like some, you. So tell us how different strands of your professional life feed your poetry, because I can see two things. One is the sort of very wise, um, ethereal, poetic, song-like quality that exists in your poetry. And the other one is a sort of very industrial and specific, ecologically exact aspect. So talk us how you marry these two wonderful sides together.
It's very difficult to speak. I am civil engineer. I work with water, and I work by the National Water Agency. I have a postgraduate course in this area. And seit Schreider, I write in 10 years. When I was 10 years old, I began to write poetry. My father is all poetry. My grandfather was poetry, and all the family, and first the tradition and the family. And I try to put all not this logical, the origin from engineer, mathematics. I work also in informatics, computer language. And I try to put all together. I don't know how can I explain. And I try out to write another language, to learn it. I have been lived 5 years in Germany for my doctoral PhD program. And I try to learn another language, and try to translate all from another language to Portuguese, and all the poems from Portuguese to another language. I have also translated in Dutch, or in Germany, English, and I think it's very interesting to learn more and more another tradition, another poetry from another language.
Marcus, do you also write in these other languages directly?
Yes, I try to do so directly in the language.
Okay.
And there's a book, Staubenschutt. I have all the poems directed in the language that Italian, and all in French, in Germany.
So you're a one-man band response to the Tower of Babel, right? I mean, you're going to you're fighting back with your.
I think it's enough form to learn in English,
Yeah, no, I mean, I support
poetry,
your
yeah.
initiatives. I mean, I also write in other languages, and I celebrate that, but it's tough, and you have to be some modest and move on and receive support and criticism, and that's good. That's good. They're wonderful poems, they're beautiful poems. I would say that there are a few places where you could we could touch up the English a bit, but that's just naturally, as I'm reading it, I found myself modifying a line here and there, but that's as you process, as you go through them or have them, polish them up for publication eventually, have another look here and there. But
Yes.
I think they are great poems, and thank you. And I have a question very quickly, but it's an important question, I think. It has to do with Brazil in the world map, literature map, because I have an impression that Brazilian literature is not celebrated enough. It's not known in the marketplaces of England, of London and New York and Paris, or wherever the marketplaces are that determine what is world literature. I just don't think we have enough of Brazilian literature available to us. And is it a problem of translation, or is it a problem of attitudes towards the writer among the sort of the cultural purveyors of, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that question, because you're a pioneer in a sense, crossing borders, bringing your literature and Brazilian literature available to others. But I fear that more needs to be done and more work needs to be made available. I just wanted to know your thoughts on that question. In the competition for space, intellectual, psychic, emotional space, where does Brazilian literature stand in the world map? Is that, if you
I
feel
think
like that's one
we
of
have a lot of very good poetry. I think it's the language barrier and the translations. I think it's the basic problem to spread overall. And I think we are not connected with the great market, literature market at the world. I think we have only a few Portuguese poetry have translated in another language. I think the Brazilian government could help with a program to translate program to another language. I think it's a problem. We don't have no Nobel Prize. Brazilian.
Right, there's never been a Nobel Prize.
Yes, but I think we have a very good poetry that could have gained the Nobel Prize if it is become more translated and more spread of the world. I think so.
Well, we'll do our part to spread the word, but thank you.
I try to do so.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcos, for coming on. In fact, we've discovered so many other sides of poets as we've done these programs that maybe one episode they should come as a different avatar. Maybe Pauline should come as a painter, you should come on as a musician, as a second sort of reappearance. And so many of us also translate. So, Indran, you were talking about Dom Moraes. I mean, we can do a whole program on Moraes, for instance, or Lalde. There are so many people, all of us have done. So yeah, lots of opportunities for the future. One of the big privileges I feel, and Indran, I know you must be sharing this with me, is the way we do this program. Indran brings 2 poets and I bring in 2 poets for this. We've never ever had a conflict all our lives because we trust each other's judgment. And if you've not known the poet before, either of us, I feel it's such a privilege. Every time I go back with 2 new friends after every program. And the friendship then evolves because the poetry first seizes you. And then, of course, you naturally keep in touch. So now Tom Edward Phillips, he is relatively a new friend, but it seems like I've known this man forever because, with poetry, we ended up chatting on Facebook Messenger for hours. And he said, listen, I have to teach a class, but let's just do it another day. So he'll have a tall glass of Bulgarian lager, which makes me very jealous when he speaks to me. And we endlessly talk about poetry and so on. So these are wonderful, wonderful, moments, and it's just really wonderful to share each other's friends. I think that's the biggest, gift we have taken back, Indran. I think you would agree. Yeah. So Tom, you're next. He's English from Reading, but he's been living in Sofia, Bulgaria for the longest time, and he's done a lot for Bulgarian literature. Let me put up the bio first. And I'll just read it out formally because I think it's important to read out bios formally. Tom Edward Phillips is a writer, translator, and lecturer born in the UK, but now living in Sofia, Bulgaria. He has a PhD in creative writing from the University of Reading and a BA in English literature from the University of Cambridge. His poetry has been published in a wide range of magazines, anthologies, and pamphlets, as well as in full-length collections, Burning Omaha, Recreation Ground, Unknown Translations. His translations of contemporary and modernist Bulgarian poetry have been widely published, while his essays on the representation of Southeast Asian Europe in English language literature have appeared in a range of academic publications. He's the editor of a critical study of the UK-born poet Peter Robinson, your PhD advisor, I think.
Yeah.
Various papers at a number of international conferences. And if you need to know anything about Bulgarian poetry, Tom's the man, you know, apart from English poetry, because one of the things he does promote very, very acutely is the sort of literary magazines which necessarily don't always get talked about, say like Stand or Poetry Review or Agenda, but magazines like The High Window, Racine, were doing incredible cutting edge stuff. And thank you, Tom, for introducing me to those magazines. You know, it's a real treat to read them. In fact, one of them doesn't do online issues. They're still sticking to the old-fashioned, properly printed journal format. You know, elegant typeface. You know, it almost looks like letterpress. You know, formatting.
Yeah.
Tom, all yours. A very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Sudeep. As you say, I've enjoyed our conversation so much. It feels like I've known you for decades. And thank you so much for inviting me here. And I just feel, listening to all, Ranjit and Pauline and Marcus's poetry, it makes me feel very honored to be in this company. And so I'm going to read a little group of poems which I hadn't really thought of, in fact, as being a group until the editor of the magazine, The High Window, that you mentioned, accepted them, and they're going to be published as a group in September. And he kind of said, I was really interested in how they're a group. And I'm not sure whether they are or not, but we'll see. So the first poem, as Sudeep said, I live in Sofia in Bulgaria and have done for 4 years. And this poem really, almost like a diary really, about one of the periods we were emerging from lockdown here. And the poem is called Making Light of It. The part of me that's had enough has had enough again. The sky's a dirty visor, car brakes scrape like stropping razors. Still, I'm walking, can work, take cash from my wallet and pay more. Though it's not my shout, pub or bar fixture, mon frere, you're not here. Like another who, rising at his own funeral, called, whose round is it? And back came our reply, it's yours. Two faces in the off-license window stare out, propped up on palms, waiting for an Edward Hopper to glance from the umbrellas. Hard rain falls. The crossing's inviting me over. Hey, is the brand on the scooped convenient thing that sits behind convenient glass. Wanting coins, I dig out, putting a few in their place, securing a better purchase. Under appropriate lighting, that waste bin may be more than what we've left in it, below snow-caked slopes where distances converge. Jays shriek, jive, lack means to make good territories. Scant food in this wood, though finches endure until they find it. Wait, what hand has dug a hole among the poplars, damp as a sump, and to what end? Tilth heats, grounds turned, rims of fountains frosted. A warehouse on the brink slumps to rust, it's lost to all purpose. As wide as the forest, a hillside of lives memorialized in small, fine print. Fearless nor faithless, we defer to what's clearing in the brightening air, now everything's been paid for. And it has. If that's the price of our final truth, their peace that passeth all understanding. Haunting graveyards again, it's like that time, a birthday. Walking out of Tenby, we found headstones mounted in a wall reclaimed from land rewilding, which has got us thinking here or there. Not so far as we go, a deepening view unfurls as a billowing sail. Still, the rain falls. Still in the off-license window, sitting on high stools, friends with hair pulled tight stir their coffees and wait. And whatever it is at hand is all we'll get. Those drawn to the wet street sheen, its patina of spattered neon. Taxis veering through puddles, spray pavements and shoes. Clouds build their own mountains, though the day's solitary jet breaks looming cover to streak blue patches with contrails. Pitching over Sofia, it banks, then steadies for final approach. A coach sits tight in a bay. No way to see how that will out. Thoughts run so far, snag, trail tendrils, trail off, lose their lightness of touch. Let us count our blessings in this stand of birch. Wrinkled under glass, a timetable, its figures rewritten in other hands, a palimpsest, abandoned railway station spaces, the cashier's desk, locked toilet door, the forgotten attend cafe tables outside, waiting rooms proliferate. The sounding bells recall priests on the run to make only just an evening service. So yes, friend, you've gone, and what you've missed is our exigencies, the last glass filled, contingencies of place and time. Fine, dead finch on the pavement, request for a carrier bag, queues to pay at the gas station with a contactless card, the arch of a bridge drips disowned ambition, lacks geometrical standards. Herd instinct works against the shepherd. You can see how it's written, his want of calm as his charges do just that. They butt, bleat, rear on the roadway, leave printed traces, smutted snow. It's all go. And they might have gone some time ago, were it not for seasons inexplicably changing and autumn clinging on. Dustmates, just watch, don't jostle, nor birds aligned in flight collide. We have circuitry. The dead good avoid what's left. A cemetery is a map of achievements. Hey, what's still on sale sounds like a ricochet, the held onto that we've never got, or what we're going to buy in the here and now. Wineglass on a gravestone, necrologues on doorposts, a way to manage things. There's food up here, and stood at the monastery gate a priest with arm in a cast. He merely wants to say how in the sky he saw a sign too late, and he might have there on the sun-split trees were it not for what cries at your terrible posthumous joke. Thank you. I should have said really at the beginning, that's kind of like a diary poem, which was kind of merged as an elegy for a very good friend of mine who died a few years ago. He's like the mon semblable, mon frère, who I mentioned at the beginning. So the second poem in this group that I want to read is perhaps from a kind of different experience. This is about going to the seaside in Bulgaria during a pandemic, which is a kind of strange experience. And we went to a very, very popular resort called Albania, which is actually, of course, where all the criminal oligarchs go on holiday, but I hadn't known that at the time. So this poem is, well, they don't really, I'm exaggerating. This poem is just called Feitas. And it comes then rolling to a curl, broiling at head height, hurling through. We dot the sea, thought complex as interference between sky's shelter, gulls dinning clatter, rattle of coins on a kiosk counters too distant to matter. Tide turns, dogs leap, barking into breeze whose careless force whips undefeated barefoot miners scouring shore. Irreparable chance scuffs rock curves, stubborn as grace, warning too soon. Seas reassemblage towards air cures, undertow unfelt, an unforeseen step, waist deep in ocean's sharp green distance. Okay, and finally, I have this rather this one I'm going to end with is actually set somewhere else. It's actually set in, well, I guess North Carolina, really, which is somewhere I went as a child with my father, and we went and stayed with some of my father's friends, and it's now occurred to me, because he worked for BOAC, or British Airways as it became, and flew to Moscow a lot, and had friends who appeared to be members of the CIA, that he might have been actually engaged in some quite interesting activity. So this is kind of a poem which is me kind of playing around with that kind of idea. So it's based on a real experience from when I was a child, but it's kind of building on that. And the poem is called Damned as Well. And that's actually, I can't remember if I've sent the version with the little quote at the beginning, because that comes from a song called The House That Jack Kerouac Built by the Australian band, the Go-Between. So I put originally as a sort of epigraph to this poem, another couple of lines from that song, and it just says, "You're reading me poetry that's Irish and so black." So perhaps there's a bit of kind of Irish. I'm also of Irish descent way back, so perhaps a bit of that as well. So this is Damned as Well. The road sign read Eden, a lane crooked through marshland. Egrets, waterways, stench of diesel at wharf's end. And their house, triumphant, built on the peak of an isthmus. Such views! And their lives as if perpetually surprised by uncertain completion, or the clothes they stood up in, circling a design, adventurous in its sunken furnishings. Terra incognita, here be dragons or ruined reed beds, as it happened. Not on the brochure, certainly. An old clock stands in the corner, snap shut clacks the pelican's beak. One delta to another, he said. Crew cut, hellhole to paradise. Or that's the implication as Bourbons have poured round. Who knows where he's been, that there were so many dead. A catfish, discolored, hauled up a bank, its greasy torso hid in seared reeds, backdrop of cranes, factory plume, a naval base. Reflected clouds refract in slicks of oil. Where does this river run? A tributary of a tributary, creaking like foil all the way back up to its source. The thing was to turn away and not look, to make no form from what was said. The road sign read Eden. Such view. Crew cut, he stood, friend of the friend of my father, back from somewhere with so many dead. And that catfish, discolored, hid in reeds dried out, beside the foiled creek. Thank you. There we are. Thank you very much.
Well, you have one short poem in passing, maybe.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, I'll read that too. Yeah, okay. Yes, because there's time. Okay, this poem, I mean, I've been dating my poems quite a lot lately, and I think that's perhaps something, maybe, I don't know, be interested to know if other poets are feeling the same need to sort of have to, I write at the end of them, like, Sophia, 5th of September 2020, as if to remind myself that, you know, time actually happens. This poem is called In Passing, and it's very specifically dated. It's dated the 31st of January 2020, which, in case you're not aware, is the day that the absolute disaster that is Brexit came into effect. Indeed, we live in Bulgaria now because of that. We want to be Europeans. We don't want to be isolated on a rather small island. Anyway, that's another story. So this is my kind of, this is almost like an elegy as well, I think. So it's kind of circular and perhaps, but an elegy for something a little bigger. And it's just called In Passing. The first sight of dry patchwork rolling out beneath us, or unfamiliar words murmured at zinc bar counters. Peeling skin on my back like an unfolding map, or yellow acres of sunflowers facing up to the sky. Sporadic glimpses of a slow-moving river through slits set into the curves of a staircase. Terracotta pigeons on terracotta tiles, or icons glinting through incense and gloom. a late tram rattling through lamplit suburbs, or an early plane flying over low city rooftops. Those spiraling conversations lasting all night, or the plangent musk of newly poured wine, the passing last whistle of a passing last train. Those days we needed nobody's leave to remain.
Beautiful finish, Tom, and beautiful poetry.
Thank you very much.
Let me just ask the question which you raised by mentioning Brexit. And so January 31, 2020 was the day of the departure from Brexit. I mean,
it was just like the official end, you know.
Right. But of course, so now that when I read the poem, I think of that, and the passing last whistle or the passing last train takes on all that new meaning, you know. So do you think poems are temporal in that sense, tied to incidents and events, or can they both be that and universal and timeless, and where January 31 means could be January 30 or could be, I mean, just, if you could just reflect on that question. When you write a poem, are you writing on that day for that day's audience, or are you somehow both doing that and reaching people way into the future? Go ahead.
No, that's actually a really interesting and in fact very pertinent question to one I'm thinking about now. And I think I always have written very much from the idea of a very specific occasion for a poem, if you know what I mean. You know, they have nearly always emerged from something. You know, so that big long poem I read at the beginning, you know, I could do a sort of exegesis explaining, you know, like where the off license is. And yes, there really were two girls sat in the window, and like that stand of birch trees is in a little town called Svoge, just up the road, and that kind of thing. And that interests me. I'm really interested in work that kind of comes from very specific locations and times, and that kind of idea that you're sort of finding them. You know, there's another poem I've written which has a little section where I kind of talk about, oh, I think there might be a poem in this kind of arrangement of balconies or whatever, or something. I can't remember it quite. And you know, and it sort of ends rather ironically because I just kind of go, missed it, walk too fast, missed the poem. But at the same time, you know, I think it's important. I mean, and one of the challenges for me is writing things which do come from very specific and effectively autobiographical experiences, but hopefully making them of interest to other people so that they can then find something in them. You know, I wrote a whole series just on my balcony, right, in the summer of 2019. I just sat, it's like a little documentary. You know, it's like, the first poem is about our neighbour's dog, kind of, you know, dropping a piece of pizza on the pavement. And I think I've been very influenced by Frank O'Hara on that, you know, that kind of thing.
And the Italian neo-realist cinema or something, I don't know.
Yeah, Italian, and I think it's coming, and it's becoming more obvious in the stuff. I think that because I'm now, you know, over the last few years, been reading a lot more poetry from other places, in other languages, other cultures, and so on, and kind of picking up things, and kind of quite a lot of contemporary Bulgarian poetry, for example, is quite often quite specific, you know, about where the starting point is.
I think of Christopher Isherwood when, you know, that line, I am a camera, right, you know, that begins the Berlin or the Weimar Republic that's disappearing. And here you are, a reporter in a sense for the world in a particular place, in Sofia, a country that's not, let's say, widely known about or known of. It's just very quickly, I mean, I know a Bulgarian poet who's translating into Spanish and Bulgarian, bringing poets from Colombia and Bulgarian poets together. So I'll put you in touch with her later. But
I think I might know. Who is that?
Alexandra Evtimova, you know her? Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No,
Okay.
do
So-
put me in touch just in case I don't.
Sure. All right. Anyway, Sudeep, go ahead.
Yes, Tom, that was marvelous. Of course, I'm familiar with your poetry. There are so many aspects to your poetry one can talk about, but just the way you ended the last bit, the plangent musk of newly poured wine, the passing of last whistle of a passing last train. And the earlier poem, the long poem, parts of it reminded me of what Walcott did in Omeros, for instance, very specifically when Philoctetes, the scene shifts to the London townscape, and what you were doing as recording it in contemporary sort of mise en scène. Also talking about cinema, because Indran brought up the whole idea of neo-Italian, movement. But I also see a lot of, I'll be very curious to see balconies, because maybe there's a lot of Hitchcock's Rear Window there, Who knows?
Yeah, there might be. I don't know. Yeah.
But to go back, yes, just
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but to go back to dating, I think so far you're the first poet who's been brave enough to read brand new work, These are 2020, 2021 poems, and you've just let them out, clearly, and they're so well formed. Was there a reason as to why you wanted to read only new poems?
Well, I suppose there were two reasons. One is purely like, it sounds a bit, I don't mean this to sound arrogant, but there are some greatest hits. And, I didn't really want to just read those, because they're a film of me doing those and stuff. And, I read a couple last night of reading here and so on. So I kind of do try and now read newer work. And there's perhaps a more kind of selfish reason in a way. I wanted to hear how they sounded. I haven't ever read those 3 poems. 2, I mean, I've read them aloud to myself, but not to other people. And I think sometimes that, like kind of live reading is a good place to actually read new work. And mix the two. I mean, I used to make a joke when I was reading in Britain. I used to say, now, here's the most frightening thing you're ever going to hear. This is a poem I just finished. It's like, at least give us 1 or 2 of the ones that are, and I felt confident about these because, as I said at the beginning, David Cook at The High Windows accepted them for publication, and he's an extremely good judge of stuff, so I was fairly confident about it.
Yeah, one of the things that ties all of you together is the attention to the sonic quality of poetry. I bring that up because I want to introduce this idea of editing poetry. And when Indran remarked on Marcos's English versions, and he said that there are perhaps 1 or 2 words or phrases that might need tinkering. Marcos, actually, I find it really useful when one reads out poetry out aloud, what to edit out and what to keep in, because the tonality you hear from you, is so integral to what should remain on the page. And I see that across all four poets, both in translation as well as in the original, how sound is so important. So briefly, can you all talk about how sound affects your editing, very specifically, starting with Ranjit and Pauline and Marcos and then Tom?
Oh, sound is absolutely key. It's primary in some ways. So to me, it has to sound right. It has to persuade me, and it has to be a kind of sound that moves across registers. Increasingly, this is my preoccupation. So yeah, so I find this very, very useful, actually, reading it out, literally projecting it, sharing it, and hearing how it's responded to. And equally, this has been a feast, a sonic feast in that sense. Just so many different tonalities and registers and concerns that each brings its own musicality. Yeah.
Pauline, do you have any thoughts on this?
Un poco lo que entiendo, Indran, about the music of poetry, different languages, or poets from different places. That is the question.
Yeah, just yes, sí, exacto.
Okay.
Lo has entendido bien. Sí.
Okay. Sí, bueno, a mí lo que más me llama la atención es escuchar en realidad, cómo escucho. Creo que en algún sentido es bueno el no comprender completamente el poema porque el intelecto no interfiere.
Okay, un segundo. So she's saying, how does one listen to a poem? Perhaps it's a good thing not to understand it completely, because the intellect is not everything that's involved in appreciating a poem.
Entonces puedo observar la sensación que me llega del poema.
So she can observe or feel the sensation that comes from the poem. Go ahead.
Puedo comprender algunas directrices claves del poema, para dónde va.
She can understand certain key sort of indicators in the poem, where the poem is going.
Y puedo observar la actitud del poeta.
And she can sort of observe the attitude of the poet. Yeah.
Entonces me llega la poesía creo que desde donde está creada realmente.
So she thinks that the poem arrives from where she believes it's created. Yeah.
Inside.
Inside, yeah, inside, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marcos?
Yes, I think it's very interesting when you hear another poetry in another language. I think it's very important the sonority, the orality from the poem. Although sometimes you can really understand all the words and all, but you can feel the poems. And I think it's very important. I have some poetry that is visual poetry, as the concrete, like the Haroldo de Campos, the Brazilian poets, the concrete poesy. But I think we organize some poetry reading and here in Brazil in the National Library, and I think it's good when you read. There's a sonority. I think it's very important to the soul from the reading from the words, and so I think it feel good.
Just Marcus, just very quickly, you mentioned concrete poetry, and hearing the concrete poem out loud was a very positive thing for you in the reading, right? Okay, I understood you correctly. Sorry, go ahead, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to say what the others have said too, and I suppose just to sort of add something new, I've become much more aware of it from my work as a translator, and I've been working on a Bulgarian, on the work of a Bulgarian modernist poet called Gaya Milev, who was kind of, well, he was killed at a very young age by a right-wing government. In his brief 30 years, he wrote some extraordinary poems, and if you hear them read in Bulgarian, they just sound extraordinary. And trying to translate that into English and then replicate or at least do something similar with the sound has really alerted me a lot more to the kind of importance of and how it might work in poetry.
Yes. I think Marcos, you said this, or was it Pauline, that it's so important, in fact, to hear poetry, regardless of whether you understand it, in terms of when it's being read out in another language. because you just sort of soak in the musicality, the words. It's visceral in many ways. And then rereading and rehearing it, and mishearing also is so important, I think. It's adds to the sort of patina of, the poem itself. And I think what connects all of you and all of us is the solidarity through words and sound and mishearings and words and languages. It's just been a really, really wonderful, wonderful evening. As always, we always want to end it at 1 hour, 30 minutes, but we end up going 2 hours every time. But then that talks about, the quality of work you guys just put together every time. So from my part, thank you very, very much, Ranjit Hoskote, Pauline Leroy, Marcos Freitas, Tom, Edward, Phillips, and Indran and I are always very thrilled to have you all. And Don Krieger, who's quietly, is the engine behind this, transmission. And you'll see tomorrow the number of places it's actually put across to. It's just stunning, the platforms he puts them to. But thank you once again for a very, very beautiful evening. And it's good night from New Delhi. It's 10:33 where we are. And hope
Thank
to
you
see
so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Sudeep.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was a lovely, lovely morning for me and evening for you.
Thank you, Indran. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all.
See you.
Fantastic. Good.
Okay.
Formally-
Thanks very much.